Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
Doing all right. The house is a little quiet now after we had a big family gathering last week. Complete with treasure hunts, daring to give penny whistles to little kids.
Yep.
And, general art projects, chaos,
and
gameplay.
I was going to say general chaos that kind of threw off our regularly scheduled schedule. But we are still here because there is a lot to talk about, although a day later than we usually would be, so apologies for that. But we are here today to preview the Packers' upcoming training camp because, Dad, we're just a few days away from, I would say, not necessarily the official start of the NFL season, but the official start of, the real NFL calendar, I guess you would say. I don't really know how to put it, but it does feel like once training camp starts, we're really, ramping up to the season.
We have football players on football fields doing football things.
Sometimes with pads on.
And eventually with pads on.
Eventually, soon. But anyway, so we figured we would come here today, and we're here to talk about what we're most interested in, what we're going to be paying the most amount of attention to, what we're going to be keeping our eyes on, whether that's, position battles, specific players, how players are deployed, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we're both really excited for this training camp coming up, and I think we're going to get a lot of answers to a lot of very interesting questions. I'm excited to get into it. I'm excited for training camp and to officially start and for us to really have some stuff to actually discuss and talk about. Before we get into any of that, though, just wanted to pitch a couple of things. If you like what you hear, subscribe. Whether that's, Spotify, Apple, YouTube. Tell a friend, leave a comment, leave a review. It would really help us. We'd really appreciate it. Follow us on Blue Sky for updates whenever, new episodes are out. Although I forgot to post for the last one. My apologies. It was a bit hectic traveling up here and moving around, and I forgot to post for that one. But normally we are posting every single time there is a new episode out to let you know when there's a new one out, keep you updated. And then we're keeping you up to date on roster moves, injury reports, et cetera, content from other Packers content creators that we enjoy. That's, again, at Father Son Packer on Blue Sky for just everything Titletown, one-stop shopping for everything Green Bay Packers related. So go ahead and give us a follow there. But, Dad, before we talk a little bit about training camp, though, like we mentioned, there is actually some news to talk about regarding the Green Bay Packers, which, if you're following us on Blue Sky, you'd already know about because we'd already have you updated on that. But we figure we might as well mention it here as well. And the first thing is that Anthony Belton, the Packers' second-round pick, is now officially signed. There was a bit of a standoff for all second-round picks around the league after Jaden Higgins of the Texans was signed to a fully guaranteed contract, which is kind of was a first for second-round picks in the NFL, and so therefore a bunch of other agents were like, well, my guy should get fully guaranteed as well, and so there was a long standoff amongst the second-round picks, but Anthony Belton for the Packers is now officially signed. He was the last draft pick signed by the Packers, so all of their draft class is now signed. He ended up getting a 73%, fully guaranteed deal. Now looking back to last year, the 54th pick in the draft, which is what Belton was, got a 62% guaranteed deal, so a slight uptick from that, but I don't think it really matters in the grand scheme of things, just, a little bit of information there. Dad, any thoughts when the Belton move came in? Just, I think mostly good that it got done before camp started, right?
That was the big thing, that he won't be delayed at all to start camp. And good for him. I think in terms of the team's perspective, the impact on the salary cap of fully guaranteeing a second round pick is very small.
Yeah.
So players should get it.
Exactly. It's not that much of a difference for a second round rookie contract, which is relatively small in the grand scheme of things to begin with. So it really doesn't affect the cap very much. And so, yeah, get the players their money. But so that's the big thing. And then a couple of roster moves. Nesta Jade Silvera and Cameron Young, a couple of defensive linemen, were released. Interesting that they were both from the same position group, I think, is the main thing. Just that they moved two defensive linemen off the team makes you think maybe there's a move coming there. I'm not really sure. Maybe they just decided all of a sudden they needed fewer defensive linemen. I don't know what you thought about that.
It seems likely they're going to add somebody at some point. I think teams generally like to keep the roster full during this part of the season when they can get his eyes on as many players as possible. But maybe they'll be in different positions. We'll see if any matching move of adding players will come in the next week or so.
Yeah, and then unfortunately, we do have our first injury report of the year. And so several players were essentially as training camps begin, they have to announce players on different lists. So there's the PUP list, in the NFI list. The PUP list, the Packers put 5 players on that. Now, they can end up being activated off of that soon. This isn't like a long-term deal. But those were Christian Watson, Quay Walker, Colin Oliver, Micah Robinson, and John Williams. So those 5 were on the PUP list. And then on the non-football injury list was Elton Jenkins, Alex Hale, and Amar Johnson. Pretty much the main takeaways from this are that we thought that perhaps, Quay Walker, who missed a good chunk of OTAs and minicamp, injured. There was some speculation that maybe that was contract related. This kind of makes you think that it is an actual nagging injury for him, because Elton Jenkins, who we're a little more sure is contract related, was put on the non-football injury list. Now, hopefully there can be a resolution to that soon. And hopefully Quay Walker's injury isn't too long-term, because they kind of need him in that linebacker room. And then also with 3 different rookies from this draft class all on the PUP list as well, that's obviously not ideal because you're losing some development time for them. But Dad, any takeaways on those 8 guys starting the year out injured? Obviously not ideal. Watson we kind of knew about because that's going to take some time still, obviously with how late his ACL tear ended up being in the year. But what about those other 7 guys?
Yeah, it really, I think, hurts to see the rookies miss time for the beginning. As I think it'll really tends to set them back, though some of them we are projected to see a lot of contribution from, like Williams is maybe going to be like the 9th or 10th offensive lineman. It also explains why some of them stopped playing as the spring program went on. It also suggests that the players got injured during the spring program since they're on the PUP list, not a college injury, which even though it's football related is not NFL related and would be NFI.
Yeah, and so the John Williams really wasn't practicing pretty much from the very start of minicamp. I don't think was ever reported as really participating in any kind of practice. Oliver was kind of on again, off again, trying to come back, and then I think he ended up doing some limited participation at the end of minicamp. But it sounds like whatever was bothering him. Now, he did have that foot injury in his last year of college that kept him out a good chunk. But so interesting that, he came back a little bit during minicamp, but wasn't ever a full participant. So keeping an eye on that one. And then Micah Robinson, he seemed to get dinged up a little bit at the end of minicamp. So that's going to be one to watch because that corner room for the, end of the corner depth chart is pretty wide open, which we'll talk about in a second.
Yeah. Just one thing I want to say about that this reminded me of. Kalen King's not on the list, and he was in a cast or some kind of brace at the end of OTA, so he must be better from whatever that injury was.
Yeah, and I remember Matt LaFleur saying that they expected he would be okay, but you never know with, sometimes the coaches are just saying that, and it's like, well, I guess we'll see, but no, it does seem like that there's at least some good news there. And then some other good news / that's interesting news was that Bill Huber of Sports Illustrated reported that Savion Williams will be ready for training camp, so that's good, after having surgery earlier this offseason to fix an injured labrum in his shoulder, which is a bit like, okay. Because if you remember during minicamp, he was in a red non-contact jersey for like most of these sessions, almost actually for all of the sessions. And in Dane Brugler's The Beast Guide, I believe it was, Savion Williams didn't do the bench press at the combine, and there was a report that was due to a shoulder injury. And now we know that he injured that shoulder in apparently his last game at TCU, which then required surgery to it. But it does sound like he'll be ready for training camp, which is some good news there.
Yeah, and we'll get the chance then now to see how he's going to be incorporated in the offense.
Don't steal the things I want to talk about.
Let me look. What else should I reveal?
Tease a couple more things. But anyway, since we're already talking about it, I think you have 4 things. I have 3 things that we're kind of keeping an eye out for this camp.
You know how I like to blab.
Yeah, you always have an extra. I was like, let's do 3, 4, and you were like, okay, so 4. So 4 then.
Actually, I only heard 3, but I put 4 in anyway.
Yeah, but anyway, do you want to start us off with your first one?
Yeah, so my first thing that I'll be keeping an eye on is the cornerback battle. So who's on the field in nickel? Is it Nixon, Valentine, and Hobbs, or is it Nixon, Hobbs, and Bullard? So the investment in the cornerback room, look at Hobbs getting $12 million APY, 4 years left on his deal. Nixon, $6 million, 2 years left on his deal. Bullard, $1.76 million, 3 years left on the deal. He was just a second-round pick. And Valentine, less than $1 million a year, 2 years left on his deal, and he was a seventh-round pick. Teams probably shouldn't let investment influence their thinking too much, but they do it all the time anyway. Sunk costs, they'll do it, even though they say we'll pay attention to who's playing the best. But if you're drafted higher, you're going to get more chances. As opposed to who has actually looked the best on the field most recently. I looked at all defensive backs since Bullard has been listed as safety, played some safety. some corner, some in the slot, some in the box. So I looked at all defensive backs with more slot and corner snaps than free safety snaps, and had at least 100 coverage snaps in the NFL last year. Those players on the Packers now, Nixon gave up 0.797 yards per coverage snap, which was 81st percentile amongst all 152 defensive backs.
81st percentile, the good way or the bad?
So near the top,
81st percentile,
near the better end. And also, if you look at like yards per slot and corner snaps, when he's lined up that position, he gave up 0.56 yards, which coincidentally was also exactly in the 81st percentile. This is, doesn't work for anybody else. Hobbs had the second best ranking amongst defensive backs in these metrics. He gave up 0.881 yards per coverage snap, 74th percentile, and 0.6 yards per slot and corner snap, which was 57th percentile.
And that's second best on the Packers. So
second best on the
Green Bay
Packers. Right. Yeah. So, right. Yes, obviously, being in the 74th percentile would not be second best out of 152 players.
But so it sounds like right now, Nixon and Hobbs are the two best corners on the team in terms of, their coverage metrics.
This particular coverage metric,
which we like yards per coverage snap, because it factors into like how many big plays you're giving up, but also factors into how often you're getting targeted, and how often, you're allowing receptions. But so that's kind of what we expected in some ways, because those guys are probably penciled in to be your starting two corners. How do the rest of the guys shake out?
Right. So Valentine, by some metrics, gets rated very highly. And some of that, I think, is he had a few interceptions. And so this metric isn't keeping track of how, whether you get interceptions or give up touchdowns, which are, both big swings in either direction. And maybe some of those things are noisy. But Valentine is very close to Hobbs in the yards per coverage snap. He's 72nd percentile. Gave up just a couple thousandths of a yard, per coverage snap less. So very little difference. And his yards per slot corner snap was 79th percentile. So that was actually better than Hobbs' yards per snap lined up in a slot or corner position. So they flipped in those two. Bullard was last in both of these coverage measurements. He was 50th percentile in yards per coverage snap, giving up almost a full yard, 0.994, and gave up more than a yard per snap lined up in the slot of the corner, 1.33, which was 6th percentile. And this number includes safeties who lined up more as sort of a corner than just as a free safety. Because if you combine all the defensive backs together, safeties dominate these numbers because they're not actually giving up many yards into their coverage.
Yeah,
because they're not necessarily directly on a receiver all the time.
And I still want to see Bullard there in the slot. I think I've talked about this before. I mean, I'm still high on him, and this is coming from the guy who was high on Darnell Savage until the end there too. And maybe I'm just a sucker for that archetype of safety, who's like a slightly smaller, really bursty guy who can really come downhill fast. But I just really still think there's something there. Maybe there isn't. But I mean, he's only had a year in the NFL. Last year, he was splitting time a lot between safety and slot, and they talked about how they felt like they were overloading him a little bit by having him learn two positions at once, and it was not letting him be him. It was not letting him be his best self at either of those positions. And so I think that if he's allowed to do full-time slot stuff, I think he will be better there. Now, that's another thing I'm keeping an eye out there in that corner room is he going to have to split time as well? Like, again, is he going to get reps at safety and then reps at slot corner and then reps at safety again? Or are they going to put him in one spot? Like, speaking of, you were talking about Bullard, that's like one thing I'm keeping my eye on for him is where is he lining up more often than not?
Yeah, so there's a little bit more. So that was the coverage numbers. If you look at the run defense grade for the corners, then Bullard is the best. His PFF grade is 67.1. His missed tackle rate is 10.8%. Nixon's also pretty good, 65.8, but particularly his missed tackle rate is even lower at 9.9%. But then if you look at Hobbs, his run defense grade is a little bit worse, 62.1, and his missed tackle rate is 22.4%. And then Valentine's run defense grade is abysmal at 40.5 with a 20% missed tackle rate.
Yeah, unfortunately, that does track with, just
the eye test.
The eye test of watching the game.
So the Packers are going to, it's like, okay, he's a good coverage corner, but he gets really beat up bad in the run game. And so, as you mentioned, the other thing we'll be looking at is Bullard primarily playing slot corner or safety. Last year, he had 361 snaps in the slot, 259 at free safety, 169 snaps in the box, 21 on what they call the D line, which is like just ambiguously close to the line of scrimmage.
Yeah,
and only six at outside corner.
Yeah, well, I'm surprised he had that. I'm surprised he had that many. To be honest,
surprised it wasn't zero.
Surprised it was not zero. But yeah, the thing with Bullard, like, and a lot of people have, kind of been like, hey, what if you just play him in the slot on, obvious running downs, like first and second down, and then you bring Valentine in and you kick one of Hobbs or Nixon into the slot? And I wouldn't be opposed to that. I just think that it might leave you just a little susceptible to like, okay, well, or at least especially in like 3rd and 5s, where it's like, okay, they could run it, or run it just straight at Val. Although I would say Nixon and Hobbs are solid tacklers, so it's not like the worst case scenario there. But
yeah, I mean, this idea of having two different kind of nickel packages makes some sense depending on what the situation is, and there's clearly different strengths in the different groups. And I would say if they do such a thing, I would much rather have Nixon on the outside than Hobbs. Nixon seems to be a much better actual outside corner than he is in the slot. And Hobbs, over his career, has been much better in the slot than he has been outside.
Yeah, and we only have the 1 year sample size for Nixon outside, so there's a little bit of that. But just with what we're working with, he has been better outside than Hobbs has been. And I am interested, the other thing is like, yeah, you can do this kind of like platooning of like Nixon on the, Bullard on the early downs and Valentine on the, obvious passing downs. At the end of the day, I think both those guys just need to get better at what they're bad at, because like you can't have a guy down at, what was it, the 6th percentile for Bullard in yards per coverage snap and for the slot and corner snaps. Is that what it was?
It was 6th percentile for yards per snap in a corner position rather than a coverage snap.
I see.
But it is a little bit different, like when you're calling something a coverage snap versus a run snap, maybe it's like, oh, we're going to slow. We're throwing now.
Yeah, now that you see Bullard. And the thing is, like, the thing with Bullard is like, it's so tough now in the modern NFL, which we've talked about before, is like you're going to see a lot of those like number one receivers motion into the slot. And it's just a really tough proposition for a guy who's like in a safety body, a safety build, to turn and run with a Justin Jefferson, to like turn and run with an Amon-Ra St. Brown. But at the same time, like, that is the job description. Like you're going to have to do that. So it's tough, but he just needs to get better there. But I think he can, and I hope he will. Anything else on the corners you wanted to touch on, or should I move on to my first one?
I think you move on to your first one now.
Okay, the number one thing that I'm looking at, and I think corner's definitely a really good one, but on the other side of the ball for me is just how the offensive line shakes out. And we've been talking about this a lot, like since minicamp, since the draft, really since the end of last year. A number of things I could go through just one by one. Elton Jenkins, will we get a contract resolution? Will he practice without one? I think sounds like no, based on the fact that he's on the NFI list, but just keeping an eye on that.
There's a contract injury.
If he gets a contract resolution, what will it look like? Will he, get a year tacked onto it? Will they just guarantee more of the money? Like what's that going to look like? Will it be a true extension? I think no one really knows what that's going to look like, because they don't want to give him a third contract, I don't think. So do you just have him a little less money, a few more years? I'm not sure. And I think it's really important to get him out there, though, because he's playing center with Jordan Love and they need to develop a rapport. And so, like, what does he look like when he does get out there? How quickly is he able to establish that rapport? How does he look at center, where he hasn't really played full time at all in the NFL? Like the last time he played it full time was in college. So we think he'll be good there, but there's no guarantee. So that's something I'm keeping an eye on. So a lot of question marks for Elton Jenkins there. Really down the line, you could say there's some question marks at every single position, every single player in the top 7. Jordan Morgan, does he get a chance at left tackle, or is he competing only at right guard like he was last year? This was actually also one of our things to watch for last training camp, which is kind of funny to think about, as was the corner and as was one more thing. So we're kind of some similar questions from last year to this year, which is kind of funny to look at. But so Jordan Morgan, where is he playing at? Is he able to beat out Ryan at right guard? Does he have a chance to beat out Walker at left tackle? I don't know. Moving on to Aaron Banks, how does he look as, the big new addition to the line? He's the only real new player coming in, we think. he's paid a lot of money to be the starting left guard. Is he fully locked into that spot, or is there a chance that maybe he gets pushed at all for that spot? We don't really know. But there's a chance, I suppose, that Morgan or Ryan are able to push him for that spot. Obviously, that would not be ideal for the Packers if he was losing that spot, given how much money they paid him. But I think there's a question there at least. Does Anthony Belton get any snaps at guard? He was only getting snaps at tackle in minicamp and OTAs. But there was some thought that, coming into the NFL, maybe his best position was guard, although the Packers said they thought of him as a tackle with some versatility. But they haven't played him anywhere else but tackle so far. So I don't know how much versatility they think he has. And then do we get any movement on either Rasheed Walker or Zach Tom contracts before training camp? That's another thing to keep an eye on. Both of them are free agents after this year. And I think the Packers would certainly like to keep Tom and then maybe Walker at the right price, although no way of knowing on that one. But I would say, of the top 7 linemen, I think there's question marks on all 7 of them. Or not necessarily question marks, but I think there are conversations around all 7 of them and just interesting things to talk about for all 7 of them. And then the only reason I don't have, questions for 8 to 10 is I'm just not sure who they are. I think it seems like right now the favorite is probably Monk based on, minicamp and given the fact he was getting a lot of those center and guard snaps with Elton out. But 9 and 10 are a real mystery between, Donovan Jennings, Kadeem Telford, Travis Glover, or just someone else.
I'd throw John Williams in there too.
Well, he's just the fact that he hasn't practiced at all.
We won't be able to see what he's doing now.
Exactly. So I don't know. I mean, he hasn't practiced one snap, so I don't feel like I can put him there because it's kind of like the Donovan Jennings situation from last year where it was like we had him high up, but then he never practiced, so it was hard for him to get a foothold in a roster spot, and he was on the practice squad most of the year. But what are your thoughts on, all those, things I talked about for each offensive lineman? Did one stick out more than the rest? Or I think the Elton Jenkins one is definitely the red flashing light, hey, we need to get this done because he needs to start developing those center reps with Jordan Love as soon as possible.
I would say the 2 big red flashing lights for me are Jenkins, get him signed so we can get out there and start practicing. And please don't wait too long to sign Zach Tom to an extension.
Yeah, money's only going up. It's only going to get more and more expensive. As each offensive lineman contract gets signed.
And as for the Donovan Jennings things, we already know he's been, secretly run out there to start.
I almost put that in there.
When Matt LaFleur wasn't looking.
Yeah, Matt LaFleur, because they asked, he got some reps with the ones, and they asked Matt LaFleur about it, and he was like, he got reps with the ones? Or it's he was like, I honestly didn't even know that. We just, whatever. So it seems like it was mostly a fill-in thing. But yeah, I don't really know who 9 and 10 are. Leaders in the clubhouse are probably Travis Glover and Kadeem Telford. Just because they were the backups last year, but they didn't play particularly well. So hard to really know there because you'd think maybe they'd be ahead of Monk, but then Monk was ahead of them in the minicamp and OTAs. But I think training camp is really when we're going to get the answer to those questions and as well as the answer to the rest of these questions. I think I'm really excited to see what Morgan looks like in year 2 because we never saw him healthy last year. And he's kind of a forgotten man as a first round pick. He was a first round pick last year. And I think that they hope that he can be the left tackle of the future, but they got to give him a shot at left tackle first. And, maybe there's a bit of a, I wouldn't say rift, but disagreement between maybe the front office and the coaching staff as to what position he is. Not that that's necessarily a problem, but just maybe the coaching staff thinks he's more of a guard. Maybe at the time of the draft pick, the front office thought he was more of a tackle and maybe had a little bit more versatility. But the coaching staff had not played him too much at tackle much at all last year, although he did get some snaps at left tackle with the ones when Rasheed Walker was missing some time during OTAs and minicamp. So maybe that was more a function of just what the roster looked like last year. But it's going to be something to keep an eye on in training camp this year.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how Morgan went pretty quickly to guard last year as a rookie, but they're still talking about him competing first, it seems first with Walker. And Belton, who everybody's saying is going to be a guard in the NFL, has been playing nothing but tackle.
Yeah, but that's only through OTAs and minicamp. So maybe in training camp he gets.
This is why there's so much to watch in training camp about the offensive line.
I think especially the offensive line because it's really in flux, and it's not necessarily there are worse places to be than who's going to end up playing where, because they kind of have, I would say 6 to 7-ish guys that I would not feel terrible about starting. So that's a good place to be, but it's definitely it drives conversation.
It's rich offensive line, problems.
Yes, exactly. And well, we hope so, but you never know. And one day it can be that, and the next day you can be like, oh God, like we have Travis Glover on the field. Like, oh my goodness, everything is terrible.
And we don't know who can snap the ball.
Exactly. So,
half a quarter later.
Exactly. Things can change in the blink of an eye. So it's important to, establish and develop that depth and keep drafting at that position. But Dad, what was your next thing you're keeping an eye out for at training camp?
So one thing I'm really curious is going to happen for the season. So how it's going to shake out in training camp is who are going to be the primary returners, both punt returner and kick returner. So I have it down to like, I was going to say 4, but actually I have 5 main candidates. My top expectation, both choice and prediction, is Mecole Hardman is basically going to be a special teamer as a returner. His career has 89 punt returns at 9.2 yards per return, and for his career has 45 kickoff returns at 23.8 yards per return. Maybe the second one, because I think they'd like to get some more off of Nixon's plate. Do you really want, who actually, as he announced, probably is CB1 on the team this year.
But then he did say, coming into minicamp this year, that he was open to doing whatever the team needed, and he was open to doing more returning. But I think he is right. They probably should not have him as a returner if he's going to be that important to the defense.
Right. As a coach, you'd say, yeah, you're open to it, but I'm not going to let you. I'm going to put somebody else back there. And so the next, though I have him listed as, I have him on the list. I don't know where to rank him, but he has 29 punt returns at 9.75 yards per return. But those who remember, those punt returns were kind of wonky and crazy.
Oh, for Keyshawn?
How Keyshawn is actually catching the ball. Those punt returns.
I don't trust. Yeah, no offense to Keyshawn, but I do not want him returning punts. I see him more as a kick returner, although that's a little bit iffy with him as, the starting outside corner. And so I think Mecole Hardman, assuming he makes the team, that's not a guarantee with how crowded the wide receiver position is, but he seems like the obvious choice as punt returner. So, I think that makes sense, but I would really like to see Savion Williams as the kick returner, though.
Right. If you look at Savion Williams' college career, punt returning, not a thing. 0 attempts.
Yeah.
But kick return, he's done 14 kick returns, 22.3 yards per return. Some of that also depends on what kind of blocking you get in front of you. It's not all of the kicker. But he's done it, and I think done okay at it.
And just remember, though, that the college kickoffs are more like the old school traditional kickoffs. They have not adopted the new line everyone up all the way down the field already without, the run up. So I do think that, I went back and actually watched his kick returns. I think he has the ability to be better at the pro style than the college style.
Yeah. And if we're looking at another candidate from the college style, Matthew Golden has also done some kickoff returns. Again, no punt returns.
I did not think he was very good at them.
And his yards per return is a little bit worse at 20.4 on the same number of 14 kickoff returns. So those are kind of the options for kickoff returns. Like Hardman's done it some, Nixon's been all pro at it, and Williams and Golden both did it a little bit in college. And then another option that Packers have used recently for the punt returns would be Jaden Reed. 0 kickoff returns, so none of that, but 25 punt returns at 8.16 yards per return. So a full yard worse than Hardman, and I kind of feel better. I mean, you have to carry an extra player on the roster, but sort of a dedicated punt returner and essentially you have like your wide receiver 7 and 8 returning punts and kickoffs, and then you fill in if you have to with guys who you will miss more from the offense.
Yeah. If Mecole Hardman makes the team, I think he is the obvious, he's going to be the punt returner. It's just a question on if, can he make the team if he's just the punt returner? I don't know. Maybe he can. Maybe there's enough value there. I don't know.
And maybe he'll do both because he's not bad at the kickoff returns as far as I can tell. So that maybe he'll be his primary role. I suspect he will be far enough down on the wide receiver depth chart to only make it if he's providing some special teams value.
Yeah. And so I think I just want to see Savion Williams do it, though, for the kick returns because, everyone comps him to Cordell Patterson, and Cordell Patterson was one of the best kick returners of all time. So, there's that. But yeah, so I think that's definitely something to keep an eye on. And we know Rich Bisaccia has, some input on, what the roster makeup looks like. So it wouldn't necessarily be surprising if someone makes the team as, a special teams, that's what they're there to do, especially if it's like the 6th, 7th receiver. Moving on to, unless there's anything else you want to say there.
I was just say we'll probably have a few more. I think this is not in the doc at all. We're just making this up now on the fly. how many special team specific players, not specific, but you like they're there because of special teams. So if we're adding McCall Hartman as kind of a return specialist, and we're probably also going to have Oladapo is mostly a special teamer, but also a reserve safety. Same thing with if we think Zane Anderson makes it like last year. Well, Isaiah Simmons seems like a really strong candidate to be a special teamer, and then he's competing also with Welch.
I think it's a good question, but the hard part for me is like we've had these special teams only guys, like, but then they end up being like surprisingly decent on defense. Like Keyshawn Nixon was like a special teams only guy, and now he's our starting outside corner. Zane Anderson was a guy like who maybe would be on the active roster maybe 1 or 2 times a year to only play special teams, and then he got some snaps to safety last year. It was pretty good. And then Oladapo, I thought like showed some stuff when he played some played some defense last year. And then, going down the list, Welch is probably the one that I think is maybe the next most likely to be the special teams only guy who makes the team. Because I think Isaiah Simmons is ahead of Hopper right now for that linebacker 4 spot. But it's a good question because I think I'm just saying like oftentimes these special teams only guys like Zane Anderson, like Oladapo, like end up being like, oh, that guy's actually not a special teams only guy. He could play some defense in a pinch.
We have had a few of those now. So the one thing the Packers have actually been kind of good at the last few years, as special teams adjacent, is having their special teams specific players show up when needed on defense and give useful snaps. Zane Anderson, nobody expected him to play defense, and he did a good job. Oladapo then came in after him and did some decent safety snaps. Wilson became like part-time starter, or most of the time starter last year for them as a linebacker when either Cooper or Quay Walker had to miss time.
Exactly. Like they bring in these guys that are like, it's like Eric said, Eric Wilson, it's like, oh, career special teamer, like is really going to help the special teams. Oh, and he's linebacker 3. He is playing a lot of snaps at linebacker right now. So it is kind of funny to look at that. Like a lot of those guys end up, contributing more than we expect. And so that's why I was just like, we might think right now they're special teams only guys, but a lot of those guys we thought have been only special teams guys in the past have ended up contributing more than maybe we initially thought and had done better than maybe we initially thought.
And better on defense than on special teams?
Yeah, fair enough. So the next thing I'm keeping my eye out for at training camp is the wide receiver room, specifically like the rotations, the roles the players are in. So the first obviously is like, when does Matthew Golden and like how does Matthew Golden break into the rotation? How long does it take for him to get, consistent reps with the ones? And then once he's there, I'm just hoping that he's not only used as a deep threat. I know the first thing that pops off the page for him is that, that 4.2 speed. But I do just think he's so much more than that, and so I hope he doesn't just get pigeonholed into that deep threat role. I'd like to see them use him at, all 3 levels of the field because I think he can be so much more than a deep threat for this offense. And then I just want to see if we see any expanded roles for the guys who are already in the offense. We kind of talked about this last offseason, but will we get some more Jaden Reed? I would like to see that. And if you remember earlier in the offseason, Jaden Reed's agent met with Brian Gutekunst, and, he was reassured that Jaden Reed is still going to be the top receiver in this offense. Well, I would love for them to use him like the top receiver in this offense because he really doesn't get much work in 2 receiver sets at all. This is from Justice Mosqueda of Acme Packing Company. Reed, over the last 2 seasons, has been on the field in less than 1 snap per game in 2 receiver sets. For reference, Dobbs is at about 13.5 and Wicks is about 9.5. So Reed has been on the field for 33 total snaps with 2 receivers on the field in the last 2 seasons, over 37 games. He is hardly ever on the field in these 2 receiver sets, even when there's still a slot receiver on the field. And so you just like to see him on the field more because he's one of your most dynamic players. He was second on the team in yards per route run last year behind only Christian Watson, who's not going to be available to start the year, and overall ranked 21st in the league among qualified receivers in that stat. That's per FTN Fantasy. And it just, would like to see him be more involved. And then, kind of speaking of Reed and how he's used, I'm interested to see how Savion Williams gets used because a lot of the stuff he did well at TCU was like design touches, gadget touches, get the ball in his hands, which is a lot of how Jaden Reed has been used recently. And so, I'd like to see Savion Williams get some of that usage, but I hope they don't take all of it away from Jaden Reed. I'd still like to see Jaden Reed get some of those end arounds because each of the last 2 years in the regular season, he has led the league in yards per attempt amongst receivers with at least 10 carries. And so he's been really dynamic with those touches. And so I don't want to take all of that usage away because he's been so good at it. But it does kind of leave the question of like, how do you use Savion Williams then without, kind of stopping what Jaden Reed does best? It's just like a question, and it's something I'm excited to see because Savion Williams is a really interesting player. He's a really unique player, and so that's kind of like something that's like, I wonder, like, what is his role in this offense, in this crowded receiver room? Are they going to use him as a more traditional receiver? Is he going to get gadget touches? What does that mean for Reed? But Dad, what do you think about the receiver room?
Yeah, I really want to see, as you mentioned, Golden featured more and give it a chance to become like a wide receiver one, a featured receiver. Like who featured in is, gets the most touches in the context, not like a super near the top of the league kind of touches. And then Williams versus Reed in terms of gadget touches, that's definitely what Williams was doing the most at. And maybe the Packers think because he's bigger, he can hold up more and not miss time from getting those extra backfield touches that maybe is digging up Reed some of the time. I don't know. That's just kind of wild speculation. The only other thing that I would say Savion Williams has really excelled at in college was like the contested catch thing. And that has held up for multiple seasons. So I think that's not just noise, but in terms of what he contributes to the team, one of the big things is his, sort of lineup and positional versatility.
Yeah, the backfield stuff is really interesting. I think maybe the most interesting stuff there because, we know Savion Williams got a lot of those, direct snaps like Wildcat stuff, but also a lot of handoffs. And last year, Jaden Reed got about, 1 to 2 snaps in the backfield a game last year, and a lot of that spinner stuff where, they'd either fake the handoff to him and then hand it off to Jacobs up the middle, or they'd actually hand it off to him, going around in the end around. And so I wonder if we really like that, but we're maybe a little nervous about, Jaden Reed getting all of that work as a lighter guy. Let's keep that in the offense, maybe expand it as a role in the offense, but we'll have a more of a threat to like take those handoffs and not take as much of a beating as like a bigger guy back there. Maybe that's the idea behind Savion Williams, but I think it's all just conjecture at this point. We have no idea how he's going to be used. So I'm just really excited to see what that usage ends up looking like.
Yeah, we have very little idea of how they plan to utilize him. So that's one of the things that's going to be really exciting to see in the offense. Even if he's going to be kind of down the depth chart, still be very interesting to see what their vision for him is. Because they picked him
with a premium pick-ish.
Early.
Premium pick-ish. Yeah, top 100 pick. So like, a decent investment there. And so you'd imagine they have a plan for him. It's just like it's going to be interesting to see what that plan is. But Dad, what's your next thing for training camp you're keeping an eye out for?
So I'm looking at the linebacker battle, mostly like 3, 4, 5, 3, 4. In terms of how they've invested, McDuffie is getting the most money in this battle at $4 million per year, and he's got 2 years left of his contract. Isaiah Simmons is getting $2 million per year on 1 year. Hopper's getting $1.15 million, but he's got 3 years left.
Still a rookie deal.
Still a rookie deal, 3 years, and he's got 3 years of control left, which is something to factor into. And he was a 3rd round pick, which is investment. And Welch is getting $1.17 million on a 1 year contract. Now, if you look at let's start with Isaiah Simmons versus Tyron Hopper versus Christian Welch.
Yeah, because to me it seems like McDuffie's a tier ahead of those 3 guys, in my opinion.
I think so, both on sort of investment and how many snaps he's been getting.
Yeah, and experience as well.
And previously with the Packers. So last year, Hopper played only 18 snaps on defense. Had a 60.7 defense grade from PFF, a 68.8 run D grade, and a 33.3% missed tackle rate. As you may recall, his missed tackle rate was bad in college. Not that bad. It was like 24%, 22%, 24%, something like that. So it's not a small sample size necessarily. It's something he's had probably before. And his coverage grade was only 53.1, so below average. And he had no pass rush snaps to give him a grade. Isaiah Simmons played 181 snaps on D for the Giants. However, his defense grade was only 45.6. That's not good. 61.5 run D grade, so that's better. His missed tackle rate was 18.2, so that's better. Still not great, but is significantly better. His coverage grade, however, 43.6. And his pass rush grade was below average at 52.9.
Which is wild because as like a former hybrid linebacker safety, you'd think he'd be better at coverage, but it has not been the case so far in his career.
Yeah, at least not last year with the Giants. But of course, the Giants, do they ever know what they're doing? They're giving away their best players and not utilizing players properly. And Welch last year played 53 snaps on defense for Denver and Baltimore combined last year. Had a 46 D grade, similar to Simmons, below average. 54 run D, not quite as good as the others. 12.5% missed tackle rate. That's looking a little better. But his coverage grade was only 44. That's similarly bad. And also no pass rush snaps. So that's their cluster of guys that seem to be really competing with each other. If you compare them to McDuffie last year, 728 defense snaps, like
more than the rest of the guys combined. I feel
more than double. It's like triple the rest of them combined. But his deep grade was also slightly below league average at 55.3. League average PFF grade is 60, 63.3 run D grade, missed tackle rate of 10.3. So
yeah,
he's way ahead of everybody else there. And his coverage grade also, though, that's where he struggles, 46.4. So we've got like three guys who were not good in coverage last year competing. And his pass rush grade, though, 68.9. So he's actually doing a little damage there in the pass rush. So as in terms of his experience and what the Packers seem to have thought about him in both the money investment and snap investment, seems to be ahead of those guys.
Again,
so it seems less likely that one of those guys can pass him.
And really looking at the missed tackle rate, I think it kind of illustrates his value is just he is reliable. You know what you're going to get from him on a day-to-day basis. He is going to be in the right spot. He is going to make the plays that are available to him. He's not going to, go above and beyond what he is as like an athlete. He's a little undersized, but he's going to make the plays that are drawn up for him on the chalkboard. He's going to struggle in coverage. He's going to get, broken off on a Texas route by Jahmyr Gibbs. But hey, who isn't, to be fair, like that's a really tough job for any linebacker in the league, unless you're like two of the three top elite guys in the league. And if he was that, he'd be getting paid a lot of money. So, there's that. Like you are getting what you're paying for with him. You know what he's going to be. There's not as much, variability with like, okay, well, we drew up for you to fill that gap and you missed the tackle and then he went for 70 yards. Like McDuffie's going to get in that gap. He's going to make the plays that are like drawn up for him. You don't need to like worry about like, if you give him an assignment, he's going to fill that assignment and then you can start worrying about the other stuff. Like you don't need to be like, man, like, do we need to give this guy some help in case he like totally blows this assignment, like goes the wrong way? But so, yeah, like he's not going to sink you. And so I think that's why they like it.
Yeah, and so it seems like he is a tier ahead of the others for number 3, and we have 3 guys competing for linebacker 4 and 5, really, I think.
Yeah.
And then maybe all 3 of them make the team, but then it'll be a competition for who's actually getting the defense snaps.
Yeah, and Goodikins has talked about, like, they felt like they didn't have enough linebackers last year, so, like, maybe they end up keeping even more, or maybe Colin Oliver counts as a linebacker.
Right.
So that's the question.
Is he linebacker 6? I didn't even list him here.
Yeah, but like that's also a tough one with him being hurt right now. You don't even know what his availability looks like. Is he going to have the time to like get those reps at linebacker? Like, we just don't know. But I do think it's interesting because I think, and then with Quay Walker being injured, we have no idea what the extent of that is. So maybe these guys are battling for linebacker too. Maybe that's the issue.
In some ways, it'll be a little easier to tell where these guys are in the competition,
where the pecking order is,
because there are more snaps available for them to compete for and get more data points to resolve who's ahead of whom.
Yeah, and that's the big thing with training camp. So we're just getting more data on like who stands where in depth charts. And that kind of takes me to my next one, which is, what does the running back depth chart look like? Because I think this is like behind Josh Jacobs as murky of a position group as we have, because you have, first off, Emmanuel Wilson, who I think everyone would agree was, quite good as a running back too last year for the Packers as like a pure runner. But I think you'd be surprised just to how good he was. Per PFF, an elite 82.9 grade. And you might say, okay, PFF, what else you got for me? Well, he was also 5th in the league in EPA per carry amongst all running backs with at least 100 attempts per FTN fantasy. So here are the guys ahead of him: Jahmyr Gibbs, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Bucky Irving, and then Emmanuel Wilson. And so, like, you might be like, oh yeah, Emmanuel Wilson, he was solid last year. No, like, he was like borderline elite in a limited role last year. And so you got him. You got Marshawn Lloyd, who was taken with a top 100 pick. Daniel Jeremiah had as his number 1 running back in the entire class last year, and then missed lots of last year due to injury. But, guys like Andy Herman, some other guys who were at the Packers practices in the offseason were saying looked like the best running back on the team in those practices before he got hurt. And then you got Chris Brooks, who does a lot of the third down stuff really well, kind of has a role on the team that a lot of the other backs can't necessarily do with that, above average pass protecting, like borderline quite good pass protecting, and then as a receiving threat out of the backfield, and really showed last year that he brought some value to the team and that the team really liked him. And so it's kind of hard. You got Emmanuel Wilson, who's a really valuable runner, Chris Brooks, who's a really valuable role player, and then Marshawn Lloyd, who they've invested a lot in and kind of brings that home run threat that the rest of the guys don't have. And we know Matt LaFleur really values that explosiveness in his offense. And so I'm just really curious as to I'm going to be eyes peeled on who is the first running back up after Jacobs.
Yeah, it's really a mystery because they all are actually looking good in slightly different roles. And I went back and looked, I think I've said this before about Marshawn Lloyd's tape in this final year of college. Man, it looks nice. He's getting around the corner, getting the edge, breaking off big runs.
Yeah, and the issue with him in college was the fumbling, but, that's going to be something that we're just not going to know until, the preseason games and the regular season games. But, when you watch him in practice, he looks electric. And so, and then the other thing, this is another one of those, okay, you got 4 running backs who are good, boo-hoo. This is another, champagne problem. But at the same time, I do think it's just interesting. I just wonder who the first guy up's going to be after Jacobs.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And I think the preseason games
are going to be fun.
Going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, I think they could be quite fun to watch.
I think there's going to be a lot of talent out there for the Packers when their subs are in.
And a lot of
preseason games.
And a lot of players that it's just we haven't gotten a chance to really see yet, like Lloyd last year. We didn't see him in really much at all in any kind of capacity.
Right, because he picked up his first injury in training camp.
Yeah, and then had 2 carries, or 3 carries in the regular season before he got hurt again. So he's really just an unknown. And so there's a lot of those unknown type guys that I think it's just going to be really exciting to get to see. But Dad, what's your last thing you're keeping an eye out for?
So I've got one more thing, and this is kind of low-hanging fruit. Everybody's talking about this. It's pass rush. And for me, it's who is actually edge 3, though maybe it's actually the real question is who is actually edge 2. I was going to
say, you could ask that too.
So OTA suggests that the Packers at least think that Lucas Van Ness is edge 2 at the moment. And but the edge 3 battle to me seems to be between Enigbari, Brenton Cox, Sorrell, and Oliver. You got 4 guys battling for that, number 3, and I guess you say number 3 and number 4 spot. Because then after you get below 4, those 5 and 6 guys don't get a whole lot of reps.
And I really think that 2 should be up for grabs, but it seems like they're kind of letting Lucas Van Ness sink or swim there.
Yeah, so we'll see how long that lasts. So if you just look at how players performed last year or their expectations, so Brenton Cox, his defensive grade overall last year was 67.2. And if you look at his sort of athletic profile, a 6.43 RAS. Enigbari, his defensive grade was 56.8, so significantly worse than Cox's. RAS very similar, 6.4. Now, if we look at Sorrell as a 4th-round rookie, the median medium outcome is a PFF grade on defense of 55.9, and his RAS was 9.31. Colin Oliver, his median outcome as a 5th-round rookie is 55.8. It's almost identical.
Yeah.
The expectation for a 4th and 5th round
rookie
edge rusher, and his RAS as edge rusher is 8.92.
And the thing with Oliver is he's obviously behind the 8 ball, being on the PUP list already and missing a lot of minicamp too.
It's going to be hard for him to, at least by the beginning of the season, be up to speed with the rest of these guys. They're all going to have a head start on him.
And Oliver's already kind of not an every down player. He's kind of already a pass rush specialist. So it's
a speed pass rush specialist sounds kind of nice, actually. Somebody gets there quickly.
I would like to see him, get a shot, but it's just going to be hard with him already being hurt. But hopefully he can come back soon and really get those reps up.
It'd be nice if he's ready in time to get into some of the joint practices and preseason games. We'll have to see. As these things go in the preseason, we have no idea what these injuries are or how long-term they're expected to be, except for Christian Watson.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, I do think there is something to be said that Brenton Cox looked better than LVN last year. I don't see why he shouldn't be competing for that number 2 spot.
Yeah, so let's look at that comparison. So as you mentioned, can whoever wins the number 3 job actually win the number 2 job and get ahead of LVN? Last year, Lucas Van Ness's defensive grade is 52.9, the worst of the group.
Yeah, and worse than, median outcome for a 4th round pick, median outcome for a 5th round pick. Lucas Van Ness was worse than them. And we talked about this, in a previous episode, if you want to go look at it. I went back and looked at, who are the edge rushers who were drafted in the 1st round who had as low of a pressure rate and as low of a total amount of pressures as Lucas Van Ness. I believe his total amount of pressures through 2 years in the league. And the list is short and not inspiring. Right. And so the
short
odds,
and not sweet.
Yeah, and the odds of breaking out essentially in your third year after having 2 years as disappointing as Van Ness has had from a pass rush perspective are not great.
Yeah, so I made a combined metric for pass rush that used the NFL Pro QB pressure percentage, the NFL Pro quick pressure percent as opposed to percent of pass rush snaps, PFF's pass rush win rate, and PFF's true pass set pass rush win rate for 111 edges who had enough snaps to qualify. Cox was 20th in the entire league.
In 2024?
In 2024. In the combined metric there of those pass rush stats. Enigbari was 90th.
Yeah.
He was better in 2023 at 52 out of 115.
He had a really down year last year.
And maybe that injury that wasn't an injury really was an injury.
Yeah.
And slowed him down for part of the That's something we don't know.
And he's also a free agent after this year, so contract year as well.
And then Lucas Van Ness last year was 93rd.
Yeah.
And not a 1 year problem because in 2023, he was 113th out of 115.
Yeah.
For this, combined metric of pass rush efficiency.
He's really got to show us something this year.
Yeah.
He really has to show us
if you look
something.
at the numbers from last year's, Brenton Cox should be edge 2.
Yeah, with a bullet, because he was just so much better than them last year. And I get that a lot of that was, against the Seahawks and the Saints, and that he played mostly only half the year, so that's a larger percentage of his snaps than it is for those other guys. But
he didn't get the Titans or the
Colts. That's true. He didn't get the Titans or the Colts. But I would not hate if I saw Cox work his way up the depth chart, because I love a meritocracy, and he was better than them last year. He just was.
If you flipped these numbers to Lucas Van Ness, everybody's like, "Oh, he's paying off as a 15th pick in the first round."
Yeah,
we don't have to be that upset about it.
Yeah. 13th pick?
13th.
13th. Yeah, 13th pick. But either way, same idea. But the fact of the matter is he is not so far. We kind of need him to, or we need someone to step into that number 2 role like Cox, like a Sorrell, like an Enigbari having a bounce back year. But I think the ideal outcome is that it is Van Ness, and I think that's why they are having him in that number 2 role for now.
Yeah, he's going to get another chance. And maybe it was the thumb. Maybe he's playing one-handed all last year.
Maybe it was the coaching staff. Maybe Covington can, bring something more out of him. I think that's what they're hoping for, but yeah, we'll see. But Dad, any, last, tidbits, honorable mentions, some things we were just thinking about that you wanted to touch on, or should we kind of wrap things up here?
We already kind of went on a few tangents here and there that we talked about some things that weren't inevitable, weren't in the doc. So,
all right.
So I think I'm good. I'm satisfied. I've satisfied my itch to add things that
and the thing is
partially related.
Yeah. And the thing is, we're going to have plenty of time to talk about these training camps over the next few weeks. But anyway, for our discussions on those, make sure you subscribe, whether that's, Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, like we already said. Leave a comment, leave a review. It would help us. Check us out on Blue Sky at Father Son Packer for updates on when those episodes are out. And, updates from these training camps, whether that's, reports, injury reports, who's winning which battles, et cetera, one-stop shop and everything Titletown. Once again, that's at Father Son Packer at Blue Sky. But yeah, we'll be back next week with some news officially from some on-field workouts. But anyway, thank you again for listening, and until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.